So anyway, I think there's a lot to like. I'm waiting. So the way you play the game in this business is that when you do something, you get it published in like a peer-reviewed academic scholarly journal. So I've got a couple of papers that are in the process of going through. Then once those are published, like then you write articles for kind of the kind of broader industry. Because if you write those first, okay, then the academic journals won't publish it because they claim it's already been published somewhere else, right? And then like what I as an academic am judged on is those scholarly journals. So that's basically the way that I have to put it. So once that process ends, then I will write my ELC article. Which process? The academic journal, getting it published in it. So because it can take a very long time because you send your paper in and then they send it out basically for like review, right? And the peer review process can take a while. Sometimes it's fast. Oftentimes it is not very fast. You have to iterate. So, but yeah, I mean, I need to reconnect with Dave again because I think, and I don't know if there's a potential opening to work with EJM on the process of triggering the ELC, or even looking carefully at like how the ELC works, right? If there are ways to improve that process. Oh yeah.
All right, so you want to be here? Sure.
But that's basically where all that is. What the grad student is working with is doing. She's doing some kind of comparative analysis of different stakeholder processes between EJM and New York and New England. Yeah. So Cal ISO sent those lawyers. I remember I was at, you know Lorenzo.
I met him a couple of times.
So I was at a conference. I've known him for a
We have a great audience already, I can tell. My name is Victoria Christensen. I'll be your student moderator tonight. I just wanted to welcome you all to the 2017 GEMS Industry Forum on Balancing Our Energy Future. I am a senior studying materials science and engineering here in the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences, and I am very happy to be here as your student monitor for tonight. Before I get started and introduce the forum, I wanted to introduce the Dean of the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences, Dean Lee Kump, to give a little welcome for us. So here he is.
Thanks, Victoria. Well, welcome to everyone here and also to our live audience online. Glad that we're beaming across the world and you're having a chance to participate in this. I'd also, before I forget, really like to thank the GEMS board, the Graduates of Earth and Mineral Sciences, not just for putting this event together, but for their extreme dedication to the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences. They've been at it already for about a day and a half and have another half a day tomorrow, working toward developing stronger links between the alumni and our college, linking up and mentoring with students, and they just have a kickoff event just prior to this with the mentoring program, connecting our alumni with students at the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences. So really outstanding group of individuals, and maybe we can all give them a round of applause. Well, the topic tonight, balancing our energy future, is an important one for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, for the nation, for Penn State, and it's a very important one for the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences. President Barron's goal, as many of you know, is for Penn State to become the energy university. And this is important for us as a College of Earth and Mineral Sciences. We plan to play an important part in establishing the Energy University by investing intellectual capital in the effort and technological innovation to help shape this energy future. Our goal is to help the Commonwealth create a roadmap for the energy future. It's going to be a complex but essential undertaking. It's going to be a roadmap that maximizes economic benefit for the Commonwealth while minimizing environmental impact. And I'm hoping that once that's created, that we will be able to build consensus around this plan. It's something where everyone wins. The presentations tonight will begin that exploration, and it's our commitment in Earth Mineral Sciences to see this project through. So I think we have an outstanding lineup of speakers for tonight, and I'm not going to take any more of your time, but rather turn it back over to Ms. Christensen and let her describe a little bit to you about what the evening's all about. So thank you for coming, and I look forward to an exciting evening.
All right, so a few housekeeping things to let you all know how this is going to go tonight. So we have 3 incredible speakers. They are outlined in your little booklet here. Unfortunately, Eric Pitlack couldn't make it tonight. He had a death in the family, so we are wishing him well, and we definitely miss him. So we have 3 speakers here, and I will introduce them more in detail before their talks. But I wanted to begin and first welcome you all, so thank you for coming, and to our virtual audience as well. So this is the first time we're doing this virtually, so we're hoping to get a lot of participation from online, and we'll be filtering your questions here. For the people in the room, you got a question card in your pamphlet, so please feel free to write your questions down, any questions that you have during the talks, and then during transitions, hold them up and we will come collect them, and at the end of all 3 presentations we'll have a forum and we'll be asking questions to our speakers. Does that sound good to everyone? Sure. Okay, good. So we're excited for you to participate in this forum. It is, like we already introduced, it's balancing our energy future. So the idea of this forum, there's 3 main ideas of this forum. One is the balancing aspect. So we're not here to tell you to stop burning fossil fuels and go fully towards renewable energy. We're here to figure out how we're going to balance oil and gas and burning these fossil fuels with renewable energy in the future. So one of the big ideas behind this is the 14 grand challenges of engineering that the National Academy of Engineering puts out every year. And actually 4 out of the 14 have to do with balancing our energy future, and I'm going to outline a few of those now. One is making solar energy more economical, so that's one of our big things for renewable energy now. And that ties into restoring and improving urban infrastructure. So how can we make our buildings more efficient? How can we live in a more efficient world and create sustainable energy to bring us into our future? Also provide energy from fusion, another source of energy that we might need in the future, and as well as developing carbon sequestration methods. So the carbon that we are burning off, how are we going to collect that and use that rather than that going into our atmosphere? So that leads me to the second aspect of this forum, sustainability. So we know climate change has been in the news a lot recently. We're all aware of that. So we wanted to focus on how our energy efforts are going to affect us in the future, especially with climate. And the third aspect is having energy available at all times. So back to the idea of switching all the way over to renewable sources. Renewable energy sources aren't available all the time. Wind isn't blowing all the time and the sun isn't out all the time. So we want to make sure when we go to flick the light switch on that the electricity is going to work. The lights are going to turn on. So how are we going to balance these new renewable sources of energy to make sure that this energy is available to us at all times? So those are the 3 main aspects of this forum. We wanted to really engage our community and of our graduates of Earth and Mineral Sciences, so thank you all for coming, and especially the students as well. So we are looking for great participation in this forum, and I know our speakers are excited to talk to you guys tonight. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Scott Perry. He's the Deputy Secretary of the Office of Oil and Gas Management in the PA Department of Environmental Protection. Mr. Perry holds a Bachelor of Arts degrees in General Arts and Sciences, Economic and Environmental Policy from Penn State University, and a Doctor of Jurisprudence degree and a certificate in dispute resolution from Willamette University College of Law. So he will be speaking about Pennsylvania energy policy, and we welcome our first speaker. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you very much, Victoria. And I got to tell you, I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you folks about one of my favorite topics, which is energy development in Pennsylvania. As you heard, I'm a Penn State grad. I actually grew up here in State College. My parents' house is over here on Mountain Indy, in fact. So being able to come back to my hometown and talk about what Pennsylvania is doing to improve our environment, improve our economy through energy development is really a treat. So, what is that Pennsylvania's energy policy? Well, it's drill, baby, drill, right? Any questions? Well, I think a lot of folks would be surprised to learn that Pennsylvania has been doing a lot more to promote a broad array of energy sources in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is indeed, I think of it as really an energy powerhouse in this nation. As you can see from these statistics, we're the #1 electricity exporter, third in generation, second largest nuclear fleet, I believe, behind Illinois. We are now the second largest producer of natural gas behind Texas, but we're gaining on them. And still a substantial coal producing state. That number can switch between 5th and 4th, depending on whether Illinois is ramping up or not. But we also have capacity in renewable energy, both wind and solar. Now, when you look at these numbers for wind and solar, it depends if you're a glass half full or glass half empty kind of person, because certainly these numbers are not as impressive as some of our other energy generating numbers. But it also shows that there is a tremendous opportunity for improvement, for growth in this sector. And before I became the deputy for the Office of Oil and Gas Management, this was really the focus of my work at DEP, was promoting renewable energy sources and energy conservation measures in Pennsylvania. So some additional facts. Pennsylvania's energy mix is not static. It is changing very rapidly, and of course a lot of that has been brought on by the advance of shale gas development in the state, where it has knocked coal production or coal share of the energy mix down significantly. It's also been the result of significant improvements in carbon dioxide emissions in Pennsylvania. As you can see, natural gas is an electricity generating source relegated to peaking units by and large. Now displacing coal, becoming a source of baseload generation that frankly has got just a superior emissions profile in every way possible compared to coal. Again, renewables only accounting for a small percentage of our energy mix, but with a tremendous potential for growth in this regard. So, what has Pennsylvania been doing in this front? I think most people, when they think of Pennsylvania, they think of us as king coal and now natural gas. That fossil fuels are really the name of the game here. But if you look at the legislation on the books, it's pretty clear that Pennsylvania's got, I'll call it the bones for a robust energy development portfolio. So I want to just take some time to talk about a few of these statutes that the department has some role in implementing, primarily alongside the Public Utility Commission. And I think that there's some opportunities here that folks might not be aware of as well. And the first one is the electricity generation deregulation statutes, where Pennsylvania moved to deregulate electricity generation and allow consumers to choose who provides their electricity. And I got to tell you, when I was working with our energy office at the time the rate caps were coming off, I was really unhappy with this statute. I frankly thought that Pennsylvania got hoodwinked, because we agreed to pay all of the construction costs for these baseload plants, the coal and nuclear baseload plants that had frankly come in way over budget. We agreed to pay the mortgage on those plants, if you will, and now the electricity caps on the generation rates are going to come off, and Pennsylvania consumers are going to feel the full weight of buying a commodity that it forms the basis of modern society on the open market. And the promise of the market, of course, is that it would temper these prices. But from where I was sitting, all I saw was enormously high barriers to entry into the electricity generation market. Natural gas peakers were probably the cheapest thing to be built. But who's in it with me to build a nuclear power plant? Can we all get our money together and enter that space? The costs are formidable. But frankly, at the time, I considered them the barbarians at the gate, were the renewable energy actors. That they weren't the same PPLs or Allegheny Energies. These were new companies, Gamesa, Iberdrola, coming in from Europe, putting in wind power to fill in the gap, so to speak, actually address the market demands. But they were encountering just extreme financing challenges, and even just getting interconnected into the grid. So it was looking to me at the time like it was very bad for Pennsylvania, that we were going to have very high electricity prices, that natural gas peaking units where we get LNG imported to us from Russia, I suppose, was going to serve as base load, and we were all going to be paying extremely high electricity prices from here on out. But no one saw the Marsalis coming, and it really changed the entire game. Did result in significant savings in electricity prices. But now, even more importantly, for this discussion on climate change, you and I have the ability to do something about climate. If we're going to wait, we can't wait for politicians to solve this problem for us. It's just not, in my opinion, going to happen. People have to lead in this regard. And if you get an electric bill, then you have an opportunity to purchase 100% renewable energy. In some cases, it may be even cheaper than the provider of last resort, the utilities price. In fact, that's for myself down in Harrisburg. I was able to find a 100% renewable energy source that was cheaper than what PPL would have sold it to me had I not shopped. So if you don't know about this, if you haven't been on the Public Utilities website, do it tonight, or you can go home now and do it now. It's one of the few things I think we can really do collectively to kind of change the conversation. The other statute that we implemented is to promote renewable energy development is our Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards Act. This is a good news, bad news story, where the good news is that Pennsylvania is having an active hand in promoting the development of Tier 2 and Tier 1 alternative energy sources, Tier 1 being things like solar and wind and biomass, Tier 2 being other forms of hydropower, for example, is a Tier 2 resource. The problem is that the standards that were set, 18% for renewables, 0.5% for solar, 8% for the Tier 1, we're meeting those already. We're supposed to be getting 18% by 2020. It's oversubscribed. The numbers were set too low. Efforts to increase the numbers have consistently been met with stiff resistance from the legislature, where they feel that consumers will pay more for electricity if they have to buy from more expensive renewable sources, and they don't support those policy choices. They support having more of a market-based approach. So as it is right now, the AEPS is not really promoting renewable energy to the maximum extent it could. The other issue, for whatever it's worth, is that you can buy these credits, across the country. The energy does not have to be produced here in Pennsylvania, which is something the governor wants to do something about. He's announced in November 2016 the Solar Energy Future, where they're working to promote solar PV installations in Pennsylvania, both at the individual scale as well as at a commercial scale. And his goal is to have 10% of Pennsylvania's electricity generated in Pennsylvania from solar electricity by 2030. That's an extremely ambitious goal. Compare 0.5% to 10%, 0.5% in AEPS to 10% for the governor's plan. A couple of other statutes that you might be interested in is the Alternative Fuels Incentive Fund. This is a law that DEP administers to provide grants for alternative fueled vehicles, natural gas vehicles as well as electric vehicles. The amount of money available changes from year to year. I am actually a recipient of it. When I bought my electric car, I got a $2,000 grant from the state, and it was one of the deciding factors in me choosing to purchase that vehicle. Just as a policy aside, one of the debates in government is how high to set these incentives, because you don't want to pay somebody to do something they were going to do anyway. And we had this other incentive program that gave people like $500 to buy a Prius. Well, that's not going to make anybody buy a Prius, but it is going to make them apply for $500. So you need to. There's a danger of setting it too low that you're not actually incentivizing any movement. But there's a policy question: if you set it too high, now you're just giving away too much money to the same people who are going to do it anyway. We also have an alternative fuels law that requires things like biomass in diesel, or biodiesel in diesel, as well as ethanol content in gasoline. And one of the statutes that I worked on writing is Act 29 of 2008, which is requiring our utilities to implement energy conservation measures, both at residential as well as commercial levels, and the installation of smart meters. So these are the meters that you can basically go online and start to control your own appliances if during peak demand time. So you can sign up for a time of use rate, and then if peak demand is occurring, you can go online and tell your refrigerator to shut off or turn your air conditioner on. You can even, and from commercial levels, you can sign up with utilities where they'll actually pay you as demand response. The businesses will either run backup generators or voluntarily turn down their usage. But it's a pretty important statute that's driving energy conservation measures in Pennsylvania, which is hugely important. Right now we've got like one of the third oldest housing stocks in the country. So we've got a lot of opportunities to improve energy efficiency in our buildings. And then finally, we actually have, Pennsylvania has acknowledged officially that climate change is not like a theory. It's a real thing. Science has pretty much conclusively shown that it is happening and is caused by human endeavors. And we have a Climate Change Act that I'll talk a little bit more in just a second about how we're implementing it. So within Pennsylvania, we do not have a Department of Energy. We have an energy office, and it is housed in Pennsylvania. But I'll share with you that the vitality of this office changes wildly. I would say maybe 10 years ago, the office existed in like a cardboard box under a desk. There was really nothing more to it than that. And then under Governor Ed Rendell, it became significantly more staffed up, where we began pursuing these other statutes that I was just talking about. But then with the economic collapse, DEP had to focus on core functions, and unfortunately, this office does not have a broad suite of statutes to administer. So currently, it is playing a role of advocate and technical liaison. So obviously, as you can see, its mission here is to promote energy conservation, alternative renewable energy for a cleaner environment and a healthier economy. They do that. They're guided through the Climate Change Action Plan that the Climate Change Act requires. So we have to do a greenhouse gas inventory, track greenhouse gas emissions, and now we're talking about developing adaptation plans, which is a little bit grim. And then finally, the responsibilities, as I was saying, they don't have tremendous responsibilities beyond implementing the Climate Action Plan, being technical support on the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards Act, and also providing technical support and liaison to other businesses and governments. So, this is still very much our future, but this is now. I think we all have to be very realistic and pragmatic about where we get our energy from and what our energy needs are today. This is just a map showing all of the unconventional wells drilled in the previous year. Obviously, heavy development down in the southwest because of the liquids-rich nature of the Marcellus there, where you get the ethane, butane, propane, and the like. But still, tremendous activity in the north-central part of the state, and that's simply a function of proximity to interstate transmission lines, as well as very, 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 very productive Marcellus wells. We're going to start to see greater shifting to Utica development. Right now in Potter County, that's 16 that represents all Utica wells that were drilled in Potter County were Utica. We're even seeing as far south or far east as Bradford. One of the operators drilled a Utica well in Bradford. 5 years ago, I would have said that we would never have seen it get any farther out than right about there, but the geologists were wrong. I want to highlight. it was a Penn State map too, don't you? Well, you have to drill holes to know what's down there, right? So I wanted to linger on this for just a little bit because, right now 51% of people heat their homes with natural gas. And if you have a house and you've got like hot steam heat or hot water, like how do you convert to heat your house? How do you now heat it with electricity when that is your infrastructure in your house? You have to go through this massive retrofit, right, to get, I suppose, a heat pump or a geothermal heat pump. But I can attest, because I tried to do it to heat my house in 0-degree weather off of a heat pump, and I've got a brand new compressor to show for my efforts. There are significant challenges to just implementing a renewable future, and natural gas will very much be part of our today and our tomorrow. But we know we need to do as good a job as we can collectively, both the government, local government, and industry, to have a story that's told at the end of the day that Pennsylvania's environment was better off because of this industry. Its environment and its economy were better off. And frankly, the displacement of coal is part of that story. I mentioned that Pennsylvania has gone from basically a natural gas backwater to second largest producer in the country, over 5 trillion cubic feet of natural gas produced. I think we consume about 1.3 trillion cubic feet, so we're a massive energy natural gas exporter, pushing gas all the way to Japan and Europe, as it were. I'm really looking forward to the conversation with you folks throughout the evening, but I am Penn State, so if you want to talk to me more about what the Office of Oil and Gas Management is doing, what the Department of Environmental Protection is doing, I'd be happy to email with you or talk by phone. So take a second and jot down my contact information.
Forgot to mention to the online audience how to submit your questions, so I hope that you wrote them down, because I'm going to tell you how to submit them. So you can submit any questions to GEMS, G-E-M-S, at ems.psu.edu. So for those of you tuning in online and have questions, we will be filtering those questions and including them in the forum. So if you have those questions, please submit them to gems at ems.psu.edu. So moving right along, I'd like to thank Scott again for his talk. It was very interesting. Hopefully we get some questions soon. And if anyone has any written questions down, feel free to hold them up now and we'll come collect them while I change the PowerPoint slides over. So our next speaker will be Stu Bressler. He's the Senior VP of Operations and Markets at PJM, and PJM coordinates the movement of wholesale electricity in all or parts of Delaware, Illinois, the list goes on, 13 states, and the District of Columbia. So he is responsible for all aspects of PJM operations and markets, and he'll tell you more about what he does now.
Close enough to your mouth.
All right. Well, thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Scott. Thank you to the GEMS organization for having me tonight. It's really a pleasure to be here. Always great to get back to my alma mater. I am a graduate of the College of Engineering, so thank you for putting up with me for a few minutes tonight and allowing me into your meeting. Really appreciate that. It's also really nice to see at least one familiar and friendly face in the audience. The guy that used to have my job is with you tonight. Bruce Valmet, former VP of Operations at PJM. Bruce, great to see you again. And so it's great to be here tonight. So the first thing I thought I should probably do is introduce PJM a little bit more in case some of you are not familiar with who we are and what we do. We're not exactly front page news most of the time, and frankly we like it that way because that usually only happens when the lights go out. And our primary job, our reason for being, if you will, is maintaining the reliability of the bulk power electricity grid in a region that encompasses all those states that Victoria talked about, sort of the mid-Atlantic region out to Chicago. You can see in the dark blue there on the chart, the region that PJM serves. So what we do essentially is real-time, minute by minute, hour to hour, we balance the amount of generation that is dispatched on the system to meet the demand that is being consumed. So electricity is consumed the instant it's generated, and our primary job is making sure that those two are always in balance. But we have to do it in a way to ensure the security of the transmission grid that delivers that generation to the load. So that is our primary function, is ensuring the reliability of the transmission system, again, on a second by second, minute by minute, hour to hour basis. We operate 2 redundant control rooms that are always hot, both of them. We can switch back and forth, and we have many redundancies built through all of our systems to ensure that we're always live. The second function that we perform, I like to say it's job 1A, if you will, is operating wholesale markets for electricity. So if you think about the utilities that serve load in the states where there is retail access and retail choice, like Scott mentioned, the alternative suppliers, they all buy electricity at wholesale and then sell it at retail. And so we operate an open, transparent, non-discriminatory market for electricity for the region that we serve. And we do that for one reason and one reason only. We operate those markets for the sole purpose of reinforcing grid reliability. So the purpose of the electricity markets is to give physical asset owners, the owners of the generation and the transmission assets, the financial incentive to act in a manner that reinforces grid reliability. So that's why we actually operate the markets. And then the third primary function we perform is we do the regional transmission system planning for the future. So it's our job to make sure that we plan for any transmission system upgrades, any new transmission facilities, and also that we will have what we call resource adequacy. We will have enough resources into the future in order to meet the peak load demands of the region we serve. So we're around primarily for reliability, and we utilize the wholesale electricity markets in order to reinforce that reliability. There are a ton of things changing in the electric industry right now. It's a tremendously exciting time to be part of the industry. Things from renewable penetration to alternative technologies to distributed energy resources and microgrids, all kinds of things evolving and adapting as the electric industry moves forward. But I figured, given my limited time tonight, I would focus on just one significant change that we see occurring that is particularly relevant to this group, and that is the tremendous fuel switch that we are seeing with respect to the resources that actually provide electricity in our region. So this is a chart showing what new generation has been built and what the fuel source of new generation that has been built in the PJM region for about the last 10 to 12 years or so. Over that time period, we have seen the retirement of somewhere around 25,000 megawatts of coal-fired generation resources. And I'm going to show that on the next chart as well to see that trend. But it's really a function of really the economics of operating those coal-fired resources, given a lot of factors, primarily the environmental regulations that have come along both at the federal and the state level over the years that have made it very difficult, particularly for older, smaller coal-fired generators, to maintain the economics in order to be able to compete in the wholesale market. And all of those retirements and then some have been replaced basically by natural gas combined cycle generation. In some cases, natural gas-fired combustion turbines as well, but the point is it's almost all natural gas. And if you see what this means for the PJM fuel mix, if you look back 10 years ago in 2006, from the standpoint of our energy production, we were over 50% coal-fired generation providing energy in the PJM system. We were about 34% nuclear, and natural gas was only 8%. And if you look at 2016, you can see we've actually balanced out to about a third, a third, a third. So the fuel mix in our region is undergoing a shift like we have never seen before. And in a lot of ways, it's bringing a tremendous amount of benefit to the region. And Scott referred to this earlier as far as electricity prices, at least at the wholesale level, being as low as they have been literally since we started operating electricity markets. If you look at the wholesale energy prices in the PJM region, they have not been what they are today, as low as they are today, since 1998, when we initially opened the electricity markets. And that is due in large part to, again, the penetration of these efficient, low-cost natural gas combined cycle generators, replacing things that have historically been more expensive. So in a lot of ways, it's a really, really good news story. But it is causing some concerns. And one of those concerns is, essentially, are we putting too many eggs in the natural gas basket as far as what is actually providing electricity in our region? And the reason that becomes a concern is nobody was really all that concerned when we were 55% coal, because everybody's comfortable with the fact that, you know, a coal-fired generator has about a month's worth of coal sitting in a pile right outside the yard. And their fuel is extremely secure. It really is, you know, there's no real danger that it's going to run out because there's always plenty of time to get more. Natural gas doesn't exactly work that way. So natural gas is usually delivered, in fact almost always delivered, in a just-in-time sort of way where it's delivered to the generator just as the generator is there ready to burn it. And so the concern is that the natural gas-fired generators' fuel is not as secure as what has been historically firing the generation in the PJM region. And so we undertook a study. And so what this chart represents is sort of the results of that study. And what we did is we looked at our current fuel mix, which again, from an energy production standpoint, is just about a third with some renewables and others, you know, thrown in there as well. And we looked at over 300 potential portfolios of generation that could potentially happen or occur, or you know, we could experience on into the future. And we said, can we maintain the reliability of the grid? Can we actually get all of the services we need from the generation fleet in order to reliably operate the system with each one of those potential portfolios? And this is really sort of the results of the study. So you can see that from where we stand today, about 21% of those potential future portfolios actually were more reliable than today's state, than our current baseline. So we actually get more of the reliability services we needed from those portfolios than we actually get today. About 27% we consider desirable, if you will. Overall, about 51.3%, that large blue band, were below the baseline, but still acceptable. So still that we could actually, you know, we could reliably operate the system. About 16% were at risk, and there were 11% that were just downright infeasible. And just to characterize these somewhat broadly, from the natural gas standpoint, and we did in our analysis penalize, if you will, the natural gas generators for that fuel security concern. But if we lost, if all of the nuclear and coal generation in PJM were to retire, and it was all replaced by natural gas, which is probably not a real feasible potential, but we analyzed it anyway, we would wind up with about 86% natural gas on the system. And that is in one of those desirable portfolios. We could actually reliably operate the grid with that fuel mix. Natural gas-fired generators are actually a lot more flexible than some of the other base load types of generators that we have had in the system historically. And so from a reliability perspective, not really a bad thing. Now, whether or not the natural gas infrastructure necessary to deliver fuel to those units could actually keep up with that kind of penetration is another story, but we analyzed it anyway. On the bottom side, on the infeasible side of the portfolios, were ones where there were more than 20% penetration of renewables. And when I say 20%, I'm talking about a capacity value of 20%. From a nameplate standpoint, it really would have been more like 60 or 70% renewables actually serving energy, providing energy on the system. Those became infeasible because the fuel source is not nearly as reliable as some of the other fuel types. And so, for example, for solar resources, we couldn't beat our morning peaks in the winter because the sun's not up yet, those types of things. So that level of renewable penetration is where we saw infeasibility on that side of things. So we undertook this analysis in order to try to answer these questions as to where we headed, and also give us the ability as we march through the future to evaluate the portfolio as it continues to evolve. As the trend has been in recent history, what we see in the queue as far as what is going to be developed in the PJM region, again, continues to be almost all natural gas into the future. So that penetration and those percentages are not going to go down. The other concern that we're seeing has to do with the public policy decisions of the states in the PJM region. Because what we see happening as a result of the underlying economics of the generation fleet is that natural gas fired resources are really outcompeting some of the other fuel types that we have on the system. And this is very concerning from a public policy standpoint for some parts of our region. So for example, in Illinois, there was legislation passed late last year in order to subsidize a couple of the nuclear plants in Illinois in order to keep them in operation. They call it their zero emissions credit or their ZECs because, according to the legislation, they want to keep those resources around due to their zero emissions characteristics so that they don't lose the output from the nuclear fleet or those nuclear generators and have it replaced by something that actually is going to emit carbon like natural gas. It's a lot lower, but it still emits carbon. But there were also concerns about jobs in the region, about tax base that those resources provide. So there were several different public policy reasons for the legislation. There's talk in other states, there's a lot been in the news lately about TMI and the potential to retire TMI due to its economics. And there's talks in other states in the PJM region about those states taking similar public policy action. Now from PJM's standpoint, we do not make policy. And we are in no place to criticize the public policy of any given state within the PJM region. However, where we do have a concern is the impact of those state public policy actions on the efficient functioning of the wholesale market. So where a state has made a decision to rely on the wholesale market to ensure its resource adequacy, which Illinois has, which Pennsylvania has, and the list goes on. But at the same time wants to put their finger on the scale and work to subsidize certain resources and keep them around, there is a danger if that spreads to suppress wholesale market prices and decrease the efficiency with which the wholesale market can do its job. We rely on investor confidence in the market price signals to actually be willing to invest in the region and actually build resources in the region. If they can't count on the sort of the efficacy of the price signals and the stability of the price signals, they're going to take their money elsewhere. And we lose the efficiency and the competition in the markets that, again, lead to that long-term efficient operation of those markets. So what we've been trying to figure out is how do we let the two work effectively side by side? One way to achieve states' goals, at least if their goal is reduction in carbon emissions, is to put a price on carbon. And that way a price on carbon could flow right through the wholesale market, be transparent in the energy market prices, and also achieve the reduction in carbon the state is looking to achieve. So we put out a paper very recently as to how we could do that. We could even do it for a portion of our region and insulate the rest of the region from the price impacts. And really all we're waiting for is states to come forward and say, yes, we want to go down that path. But absent a market-based solution, such as a price on carbon, we're looking for ways that we can accommodate these state public policy decisions and still maintain the sort of the purity, if you will, as pure as it is, the price signal that's established through the wholesale markets. And we're working very hard through our stakeholder process to try to develop an approach that will allow us to do that. I don't have the time really to go into the details as to what those proposals look like, but suffice to say that's where we're headed. So again, these are the issues that we find facing the industry and really from PJM's perspective that we are looking to address. And I will determine sort of how the industry evolves in the future and where we go with our energy future. So again, like Scott, I look forward to the discussion during the panel and your questions. So thank you very much again for having me.
Okay, all right.
If anyone wrote down any questions, please hold them up so we can collect them. And moving on to our last speaker, we have Seth Blumsack, the Associate Professor in the Department of Energy and Mineral Engineering, an Adjunct Research Professor at Carnegie Mellon Electricity and Industry Center, and an External Factory at Santa Fe Institute.
Thank you, Brett. So can I clip this on? All right. So thank you to the GEMS folks for inviting me. This is a lot of fun. I noticed, I have to say,
I noticed there's not a whole lot of enthusiasm for my friend Scott's nuclear energy proposal. And I'm very disappointed because while nuclear power may be really kind of in the dumps in this country, globally, 2016 was one of the highest growth years for the global nuclear power industry in its entire history. Okay? And so I don't, how I follow Scott and Stu is beyond me. But what I want to talk about, and what I was asked to talk about, was the world outside of Pennsylvania, which I realize is sometimes hard to grasp. Because the world outside of Penn, so Stu was right. I have been a student of the electric power industry for about 20 years. And the way that it is changing is, even to me, really unbelievable, the speed with which things are changing. But things are also changing very fast in the world outside of Pennsylvania as well. And they are changing in ways that are sometimes kind of at odds with one another, and create these kind of internal tensions about what exactly our energy development goals are. Okay, so that's what I want to talk about this. Okay, so there is the distribution of access to energy, especially electric power around the world, is very uneven. Okay, so this is a picture that basically shows the countries of the world measured not by population or GDP or land area or anything like that, okay, but by their access to electric power. Okay, and so some countries have very broad access to electric power, so they look very fat. And in some countries, electrification is something that may exist in concept but not in practice, and so those nations are very stable. Okay, and so there have been a number of different articles and books and things written lately. One of the ones that I think is among the most impassioned is this book, Lighting the World, by a guy named Jim Rogers, who used to run a utility called Duke Energy down in North Carolina, right? And so in this particular book and others, they're basically making this argument that the inequities in energy access, especially electric power, right, is really a moral failing of the civilized world, right? And this is a problem that we desperately need to fix. Okay, and if you look, that there are all sorts of reasons to think that that's not such a bad argument, right? So as people have broader access to energy and electric power, right, countries get richer. Countries with higher energy and electric power use do better on all sorts of human development measures, whether you are talking about lifespan or infant mortality or access to clean water or anything like that. All of these things are really, really connected to the ability to harness energy, especially electricity. Okay. On the other hand, countries that do have access to a lot of energy resources and generate a lot of electric power, right, also produce a lot of pollution, right? And so even if you don't like carbon, right, you could replace carbon with sulfur or particulates, or pick your air or water poison. It doesn't really matter. Okay, you'll basically get the same picture. Okay, that energy use, and especially electric power, conveys all of these social benefits, but it is also, at least historically, has been a major environmental management challenge. Okay, and so just like things are changing in Pennsylvania, things are changing globally as well. And so both renewables and nuclear power and natural gas globally, right, are growing very, very rapidly, right? And in some places have overtaken or traditional energy resources like coal as kind of major energy sources, right? And the amount of the amount of non-hydro renewable energy that the world uses has effectively doubled in the space of about a decade, right? Which is just very, very rapid. Okay, and so the world is changing, right? We are increasing access to energy and electricity. We are doing it in ways that involve less fossil fuels and more non-fossil resources. And I mean, this is a very big change. This is a big change in technology. This is a big change in infrastructure, right? And there's a lot of hand-wringing over how on earth are we going to keep the lights on when the sun doesn't shine half the day and all this other kinds of stuff. Okay? And what I basically want to leave you with is that there are portions of this very rapid and very major technological shift that are a lot easier to cope with than we think they are. And there are some pieces of this that are a lot harder to cope with than we sometimes give them credit for, okay? And so I want to talk about some easy pieces and some non-easy pieces, right? And then I'll be quiet and let you ask questions. Okay. One easy piece, one of the most interesting issues with energy development to me is the land use issues that it creates, right? Because whether we are talking about building power plants or power lines or pipelines, right, we get into issues about how we want to use land, who should benefit from it, what the potential impacts are, okay? And those are really, really interesting. And as somebody with a background in economics, it's also a very confusing issue because land, at least as far as the land that we need to essentially power the planet, is not a scarce resource. And we could basically meet an immense amount of energy needs with a very small amount of land relative to what we would need for agriculture for a growing planet, the amount of land that we need for energy use for a growing planet. Even if we don't do things perfectly, right? It's not that large. Okay, so land use issues are sort of always contentious, but in some sense, this should be one of the easy pieces. Okay. Another easy piece, or another piece that is becoming easier, is that as deployment of renewable energy technologies, especially wind and solar, goes up, right, the costs have really plummeted. Okay, and by the time we all get done with this talk tonight, the cost of solar is going to fall by another 50%. Right? The cost declines in these technologies and the speed with which costs have come down have simply been astounding. Right? I remember as a graduate student, we had an industry visitor come to give a seminar, and he said, and this was back in about 2005, right? And he said within 10 years, solar power will be competitive, right? And we all almost laughed him out of the room. You know what? In a lot of places, he was right. Okay? And one of the things that I think a lot of us who claim to know things about this industry didn't count on was just how fast the cost of some of these technologies would fall as we started to use more of them. Okay? The costs are also starting to fall for some complementary technologies to wind and solar, so energy storage. Okay? Maybe Tesla with its giant battery factory in Nevada will solve this problem once and for all. Maybe they won't. Even if they don't, there's a lot of innovation there which is driving down energy storage costs. Okay? The one missing piece of this that has seemed to be a little bit difficult, right? And maybe because it is not as glamorous or as sexy as wind power, solar power, batteries, right? Are the power electronics, like the boxes that connect solar and wind power to the grid or to your home. Okay, it seemed to have been a lot harder to drive those costs down than the cost of wind, solar, or energy storage. Okay. So those are some pieces that I think are actually a lot easier than we give them credit. Okay. So costs for cleaner energy technologies are falling, okay? And they could continue to fall very, very fast, okay? But we are caught up in, I think, some tension between the least cost path to deployment of cleaner energy sources and the path that is going to solve the problem I pointed out at the very beginning of my talk, right? That we want to increase access to energy and electric power very rapidly, okay? And so there was this idea that was sort of floated during the negotiation of the Paris Climate Agreement that came to be known as the virtuous cycle, okay? And the idea is it goes something like this, okay? So you make commitments to install a certain amount of renewable energy technology, which is going to drive the price down, okay? And at the same time, you put some kind of price or fee or tax or whatever you want to call it, okay, on carbon. You take that money, okay, and you pour it into R&D for renewable energy technologies, which is going to drive the cost down further, which is going to encourage more people to take it up, which will drive the cost down further, and so on and so on. There goes the virtuous cycle. Okay, that was the idea. Okay, and that is a really compelling idea, right? In practice, there are a couple of challenges that I think we are still figuring out. The first is that if we want to get technologies like wind and solar and energy storage anywhere near a substantial part of the global energy mix, it is going to involve a fairly massive shift in materials usage, right? And especially if we want to do this quickly. Okay. The second, and both Scott and Stu alluded to this a little bit, is that even though energy storage costs are coming down, we still can't store electricity at large volumes at a really, really competitive price, okay? And so we have to think about, and we have to think very carefully about how we are going to integrate these sources into very large infrastructures, okay? And so there was a case in Texas a few years ago where you had this kind of odd front come through Texas and basically kind of stopped wind power dead in its tracks, right? And that actually posed a real threat to the power grid in Texas, right? Because the irony is that Texas has been one of the most successful places in all of North America at integrating renewable energy into their power. And in sort of another hiccup, there have been some portions of Australia, right, that have seen such rapid growth in solar energy because of incentives and subsidies and all sorts of other things that it is starting to threaten the reliability of their grid as well. Okay, and so it is very possible to integrate large amounts of these renewable resources without basically destroying your infrastructure. But you have to do it carefully, okay? And this brings us to kind of the final tension, okay? You remember the virtuous cycle, okay? You invest in renewables, you drive the cost down, you pour some kind of fossil tax R&D money into renewables, you further drive the cost down, so on and so on, okay? That only really works if you can build these technologies at scale. Okay, so for the developing world, okay, remember all the little skinny people, all the skinny countries on the picture, okay. The fundamental question is that if we want to increase their access to energy and electric power, how do we do it? Okay, do we take our large interconnected infrastructures like we have in the U.S. and the rest of North America and Europe and try to replicate them there? Okay. We have tried this with other countries, and it has not always been very successful for all sorts of reasons, right? You need functional government to make sure people don't steal from the infrastructure, right? You need a functional security system to make sure people don't blow it up. You need functional supply chains to make sure you can get concrete to place. I mean, all these things. And so for those parts of the world where we care the most about increasing their access to electricity, okay, the most effective way to do that, okay, is with smaller scale renewables, primarily solar, right, and energy storage, okay. But that is not the most cost-effective way, right? That is not going to get you this virtuous cycle, because the economics of very large-scale installations are so much better than the solar panels that people put on their roofs or people put in villages in remote areas. Okay? And so the question is, what do we care about? Right? Do we really care about this virtuous cycle and pushing these costs down as fast as possible? Okay? Or do we care about increasing access as fast as possible in the developed world? Because the answers to those two questions are really different. Okay? There is a developed world version of this sort of same problem, which is, do we want to give people the freedom to put solar panels on their roofs and essentially bypass the utility and bypass PJM, right? And if we want to do that, right, how do we make sure that we are able to pay for the infrastructure on which we all will wind up depending, okay, on those cloudy days or when something breaks, okay? And this is not a new battle. This is not a new issue, right? So the quote up here is from a play that was produced by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s basically about TVA and universal electrification, okay? And so basically the same issues that they were dealing with not quite 100 years ago, okay, we are dealing with today as we grapple with all of these changes that are happening to our very developed electricity industry in the developed world. Okay, and so what I want to basically close with it is basically that we technologically, right, we have lots and lots of different solutions, right? It is like the Wild West out there. There are so many good ideas, and that's really cool. But ultimately, kind of how we can implement change, right? Whether that's easy change or hard change in our global energy systems matters as, it depends as much on institutions and behavior and what the rules are, right, as it does the pace of technological change and technological innovation. All right, so I am done, and I think we can now turn to the fun part.
Thank you so much. We have lots of questions. I'll collect yours really quick. Thank you. Just a reminder for the online audience to submit your questions to gems@ems.psu.edu. So now here comes the fun part. Thank you all for submitting your questions. And let's thank our speakers one more time. Three different perspectives, and hopefully now we can answer some questions and combine those perspectives and have a good discussion. So our first question comes from our online audience, and it is, what will happen to nuclear power plants reaching end of useful life? What is the waste disposal strategy with Yucca Mountain now off limits? Does anyone want to start?
I can try.
It's a difficult one.
Go get him, Seth.
So tread lightly. So the waste, we are, human beings are really good at a lot of things. One of the things that we are best at is leaving problems for somebody else to deal with. And this has really been one of the simplest problems or the simplest cans to kick down the road, to let somebody deal with in 20 or 30 years, and then they can kick the can down the road and deal with it 20 or 30 years after that. So Yucca Mountain is sort of an interesting case because at least the way that I understand it, is that even if Yucca Mountain were open tomorrow, okay, it would fill immediately with nuclear and with like military and weapons waste. And then, so as soon as it opens, we need another one, right? And so, certainly lots of things about Yucca Mountain have been an example of kind of the problems of politics writ large. But the reality is that Yucca Mountain was never going to be the solution to the civilian nuclear waste issue. We do need to figure out a way to deal with that. It's a problem that we've been successful at basically kicking down the road. But on the other hand, we have been successfully storing this waste on site for a really long time. And I think a reasonable question is, how long can we reasonably store this waste on site at nuclear power plants? And whether we like the answer or not, I suspect the answer is that we can do this effectively actually for a really long time. And so we do have the ability to kick this can down the road for many decades. Anyone else want to try?
Yeah, pass.
Started you off with a hard one there. Sorry, guys.
Maybe we could use it to plug these Marcellus wells.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? How many nuclear power plants represent 24% of power in Pennsylvania?
How many nuclear power plants?
How many nuclear power plants are there in Pennsylvania?
5.
I think 5, yeah.
And what's the practical life of them right now?
Practical life of them right now question. Sorry for the online.
So the practical life, I mean, if you keep replacing all the parts, you could basically generate electricity at these sites essentially forever.
Okay, I'll move on and give you guys a little bit easier question. For college towns where a lot of residents rent apartments, are there actions to cope with rental agencies to increase renewable energy usage?
Well, I don't think your utility bill is usually wrapped up in the rent. So I think you could,
I pay my electricity separate than from
Right.
Just a quick example.
right, so you get your own electric bill.
Yes.
And so you could elect to get a different utility or electricity provider. So I'm certain you could, everything's negotiable, right? So if you want to work that into the rental agreement, I can't see why not. Why they wouldn't, if they're indifferent, if they're getting compensated for the electricity that's being used, then I could certainly see them being willing to provide a renewable energy source if it is included in the rent.
So every time I teach my class on electricity economics, I ask the students, and there's usually about 100 kids in the class or so. I ask them how many pay their own electric bill, and I get about half the hands going up saying, "Oh, I hate paying the electric bill," and then I get the other half of the hands going up saying, "What's an electric bill?" So State College is only one data point. But I think the question hits on a really pervasive problem in energy efficiency, right? And it's not just college towns, right? It is large urban areas too, which is that you have this huge difference in incentives between building owners and building occupants if those two people or entities are not the same thing, right? And I know that a lot of cities have really struggled with how to reconcile this, this so-called split incentive problem, right? Where landlords who, especially landlords, who don't pay the utility bills for the buildings, really have very few incentives to do anything, whether it's renewable energy or energy efficiency or anything like that. And So so cities have experimented with different things. They've experimented with different energy efficiency programs. I think the state of Vermont has actually had some success here. There are some cities that have enacted building energy disclosure laws where you have to report the energy use from your building basically to the city or to the state every year. And maybe this is the idea that they will either spot those buildings that are kind of could be best targeted for efficiency upgrades, or if it is simply to shame the building owner into trying to do something about it. There is some evidence, by the way, that actually energy efficient building retrofits can be capitalized in the market value of the building, right? And the evidence is uneven across different cities and different locations. But there is some evidence that that even if you have this incentive problem, that energy efficiency investments could pay for themselves through the value of the building.
Thank you. The next question is, as you look at natural gas supply electricity growth, what brings greater risk? Actual gas resource available from the source or transportation infrastructure?
I think from my perspective and PJM's perspective, I think the transportation infrastructure is certainly where most of the risk lies. There's, at least from our point of view, certainly no shortage of supply, certainly in the Marcellus region or even outside of the Marcellus region. But when we experience our typical winter peak loads, obviously the natural gas delivery system is also peaking due to the human needs services and the heating loads that you see at the same time. And so when we see unavailability of natural gas generation due to fuel limitations, it's universally because of transportation limitations as opposed to supply restrictions.
This one, ready? With the changing fuel mix occurring in the energy sector, what are the impacts on our water supplies?
Well, I guess the question is really getting into how often is natural gas development affecting water supplies, and the answer is very, very infrequently. Less than 0.5% of the wells drilled have some kind of impact to water supplies, and even then, it's a temporary impact, as opposed to, say, with coal mining, where you've got this legacy of thousands of miles of dead streams, people's water supplies being completely dewatered due to longwall practices. So natural gas is a better story to tell about the protection of water resources in Pennsylvania than the coal mining industry can tell.
One thing I'll add to that a little more broadly, a lot of our energy resources and systems are very dependent on having stable water supplies, and this is not just water for natural gas drilling. This is having sufficient water for cooling of power plants and things like that. And one of the things that is starting to happen as global climatic patterns shift is that areas that formerly you would have considered to be like rainy and wet and have terrible weather are starting to become much more drought prone, right? And so there have been a number of circumstances in the past several years where power plants, for example, couldn't operate during certain times of the year because river levels were too low, right? And they basically couldn't access cooling water. And so particularly as we, if you believe that we are on this inexorable march towards the electrification of everything, then the kind of couplings between the water systems and our energy delivery systems are going to become much more tight.
Well, I'm glad you brought this point up, because there's a lot of misperceptions also about the amount of water being used to develop natural gas resources And the amount of cooling water used, I think, is a great point, because I recall the Susquehanna River Basin Commission had an application for a nuclear power plant, and they were going to propose to use 40 million gallons of water a day for cooling. Now, obviously, it's not like it's still part of the hydrologic cycle, but having that steam rain down in India is not going to do Pennsylvania a lot of good. And the Fish and Boat Commission did a study on the consumptive use of the Marcellus industry, and it showed that at peak build-out, it was using less water to frack these wells than we spend watering our golf courses and making snow at the ski resorts.
Yeah, just from PJM's experience, Seth's comments is an interesting one about generating resource unavailability due to water levels. Typically, when we see generators unable to perform because of water concerns, it's usually because it's in the peak summer period and the water gets too warm. So I don't know that it's usually because there's a lack of available water. It's usually just because the temperature gets to the point where it's not cooling as efficiently, obviously, and then the generator can't produce as many megawatts.
Well, and with these natural gas plants that are being built, I know that at least some of them don't need that river water. They can basically hook up to a public water supply because
they use a lot less water, right?
Next question. In dialogue with the general public, do you think it may be better to avoid the term climate change and focus instead on the need to replace non-renewable sources?
I guess I'm curious how you would focus that discussion without focusing on carbon emissions. In other words, why else would you need to replace non-renewable resources?
I suppose it's because I think the question is kind of getting at this belief that it's such a polarizing debate that people just retreat to their various corners just by acknowledging that you're having a discussion on climate change. And it's a real issue. I deal with folks all the time where you can talk to them about a lot of things related to climate change, like flood control, but if you come right out and start talking about climate change, then your conversation about how to deal with flooding issues all of a sudden goes away too. So these communication issues are something I wrestle with all the time, and it's a valid point, avoiding polarizing topics to try and find common ground.
So maybe we should go back to talking about nuclear waste for an easy So the way that discussions are framed, I think is very important. Why does Texas, of all places, have more wind power than any place else in the U.S.?
Money.
Because because they frame the discussion about money, about economic development, right? And this is one of the things that I think, frankly, a lot of other states, including this state, could learn from Texas, right? If you want to have a big energy-based economy, that is perfectly fine. But if you want to do that, then you have to frame the discussion in a way that you don't necessarily discriminate between the resources that come from below the ground versus those that come from above the ground, right? And so, I mean, I think the way that renewable energy development has been framed in Texas, right, in a state which is not exactly known for its liberal political leanings, it has, I think, been very, very effective.
I have a similar question from online that has to deal with the point of small renewable electricity generation. What can be done to encourage individual participation, and is there an economic model that promotes the growth here?
Well, I think what we've seen in other areas, particularly on the state level, is approaches like net metering, where retail customers that put solar panels on their roof of their home, and then net against their consumption from the utility, or actually can sell into the grid, get essentially what amounts to an advantageous rate because they can offset the retail cost of their electricity as opposed to selling it at wholesale and that kind of thing. So it sort of amounts to an economic incentive, if you will, to actually implement or install those kinds of solar panels. But I know that's worked to stimulate that investment in certain areas of the PJM region and also internationally. I know somebody talked about Australia, was Seth, I think talked about Australia, and they've seen a tremendous penetration of rooftop solar because of those, again, economically advantageous impacts for the retail customer.
And Pennsylvania has, I think, a tremendous net metering program where you are literally spinning the meter backward. You're not getting paid, you're getting paid for generations, transmission, and distribution,
Right.
which is kind of crazy because you're actually sending your electrons over their wires and you are getting paid for it. So a surprise policy win.
But it does open up other issues that we that also come with that, like, and Seth mentioned this too, who pays for the distribution infrastructure that you need as a backup, right, and that kind of thing. So there are issues that need to be addressed with that.
On the topic of individual use of renewable sources such as solar, roofs and things like that, how do we deal with the aesthetics aspect of renewable energy?
It's beautiful.
It's in the eye of the beholder. I don't know.
For sure. That was one of the more frustrating things I had to deal with when I was in my previous job, was wrestling with the environmentalists that were coming out of the woodwork to protest the wind turbines on the ridgetops in Pennsylvania because of the bird and bat issue. And like, if you look at the average wind turbine will kill like 2 birds a year, which is way, way less than the average house cat. But it was a very frustrating conversation. And then, of course, there was the view shed argument. It's ruining the view shed, where again, it just looked like, I don't know, it just, those turbines to me look amazing. But I did get an earful from one of the drillers in Texas about how ugly they all look. And so, yeah, right, beauty is totally in the eye of the beholder.
If you've ever been on the highway down around Orlando, Florida, there's transmission towers in the shape of Mickey Mouse. You know, with the big circle on that too. So maybe that's what I did a build off of.
Yeah. Rainbow colors, I like it.
Yeah, if you could get them to look like trees, that would solve an awful lot of problems.
Cell towers too.
Okay, great. So moving on to more of a national level, Interstate 80 was recently designated as an alternative fuel transportation corridor by states from Iowa to New York City. What is PA doing to support this initiative?
What was the question again?
Interstate 80 was recently designated as an alternative fuel transportation corridor by states from Iowa to New York City. What is PA doing to support this initiative?
I'm afraid I don't know. Well, and something similar, like we're putting in electric vehicle charging stations along the turnpike, that would be something similar, but I'm not aware of what is occurring on Interstate 80.
Sorry, I'm not either.
That's okay.
Anybody from the audience want to jump in on that?
So moving more to an international level, Germany is facing huge problems in its electricity markets due to mandated uses of solar and wind sources, plus retirement of nuclear. How can the U.S. avoid these problems?
Well, my understanding of what has occurred in Germany is they have implemented significant subsidies for renewable resources to the extent that their retail rates are the equivalent of something around 18 or 19 cents a kilowatt hour or something like that. And yet they actually have, at least at one point, had seen an increase in carbon emissions because the coal units are still running and selling their energy to the south when they're not needed to serve load in Germany. And I think at times they are when the renewables aren't able to generate all the time. So I think on a pounds per megawatt hour basis, the PJM region actually dipped below Germany for the first time in 2016. So I guess I don't have the silver bullet answer, but certainly I think, and Seth I think said this during his slides, is there needs to be adequate planning for how we're going to go about this. And so, you know, to the extent that there are renewable mandates and money is spent on economic development in order to to stimulate the development of renewable resources, I think there has to be the same type of regulation, if you will, to curtail what you're really trying to reduce, which is the carbon emissions at the same time. And it seems like is what hasn't happened sufficiently in Germany. And to the point of the question, the decision to retire all their nuclear units certainly didn't help them out at all either. So it's really a kind of combination of things, I think, over there.
So Germany and other European nations are really blessed because they have a gigantic battery in the form of Norway and Finland and Sweden, right? Because the hydro resources there are really able to balance a lot of the kind of continental-wide fluctuations in wind and solar output in Europe, right? And it doesn't do it perfectly. So my understanding is that the other thing that Germany has exported down to Italy, other than coal-fired electricity, is voltage problems on their power grid.
You can throw Poland into that too.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that the U.S. experience has shown is that we can, if we think about the problem in a systematic way, we can deal with surprisingly high levels of wind and solar on our power grid without really causing any disruptions, right? Texas does this, the parts of the Midwest do this. I mean, there are times when 50% or more of the electricity in these areas is being generated by wind power, right? And the grid does not collapse, right? And so I think that we've come a tremendously long way in being able to think about how to utilize the portfolio of really controllable resources that we have to get up to 30, 40 some odd percent wind power, right? Once you start getting a lot more than that, then you have to start thinking about energy storage at scale or being able to move demand around to different parts of the day or to different parts of the grid. But these are, these are the kinds of kind of planning exercises that I think, people like Stu and his colleagues in industry, you guys spend a lot of time thinking about this.
Yeah, and we are nowhere near in the PJM region the limit for renewable penetration. So if anything I said during my talk even implied that is not what I was saying at all. We can stand a lot more renewable resources. But getting back to the question and some relevance here in PJM, we are seeing the competitive markets work, right? So the economics are there, the benefits of the low-cost natural gas are there, and some resources are being competed out as a result. But as renewable resources get developed, as natural gas competes and is dropping carbon emissions as a result, certain states, and I won't name them by name, but one of them is immediately to our west, had utilities going to the state looking for subsidies for coal-fired generation to keep it around because of concerns around jobs and tax base and those kinds of things. Again, I'm not throwing stones here. They have a business to operate. I totally understand it. But from a policy-making standpoint, if what we really are aiming for is a reduction in carbon emissions, and that's the goal for some of these policies that are out there, it certainly isn't going to help that if we go the other direction.
Great, thank you guys. We're going to ask one last question and then close it up. So the last question will be, what is one action individuals could take to help balance our energy future? And then I'll ask each of you to kind of say a short sentence or two about where you hope to see our energy future in 10, 20, 50 years from now.
Well, I think, as I stated, that one of the more important things you can do is kind of put your money where your mouth is. If you want to see something change, we have an opportunity in Pennsylvania to do that by buying electricity from other sources. It's very, very easy to do. And then, like, wear a hat in the wintertime.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for not immediately leaving and running home and checking out the PAPUC website. Sticking around for the rest of the seminar. But certainly, where retail choice exists, take advantage of it. Competitive markets work, but only to the extent that that there are a sufficient number of participants. So I certainly would suggest that as one thing you can do. Go to the PAPUC website if you haven't already and shop for electricity. I know Seth had mentioned, and I had heard it before too, that years ago when utilities had surveyed their customers about these types of issues, a significant percentage of those customers couldn't even tell them who their electricity provider was, who their electric company was. It's just not something people pay a lot of attention to. But if this is going to work, I think the more participation there is, the better. As far as where I hope this industry is in 10 or 15 years, I guess the request I would have is for policymakers to make a choice and stick with it. It doesn't work very well to have your foot in two different boats or whatever sort of metaphor you want to use. So where states have elected to embrace competition, to sort of put that foot back in the other boat and look to regulate certain aspects or subsidize certain resources just works to sort of defeat the purpose. Regulatory models can work just fine as well. We have a mix of states in PJM where we have fully regulated states and we have deregulated states, and they coexist just fine, and the wholesale market umbrella works just great over both models. But I guess my plea to the policymakers is make a choice and then stick with that choice.
So one of the great puzzles of the entire history of the study of energy economics is why people so consistently fail to do things or fail to I guess do things like purchase appliances that are not in their economic self-interest. Right? People leave money on the table all the time by buying energy inefficient appliances, by not replacing light bulbs, or doing all of these other things. Okay, so so one of the things that you can do, and this is especially to the younger people in the audience, right, is to become more energy literate, right, and stop wasting your money. Okay, and so where I guess I sort of hope that the energy world will go in the next 10 years is that I think one of the most exciting developments that has happened in the past several years is how how much cheaper and more feasible it has been to create these to create these smaller scale energy systems like microgrids and things like that, and that to me is tremendously exciting. The missing piece, the big missing piece to this that I see possibly getting resolved in the next decade or so as more creative people get into this, is that for these systems to really work, not only do they have to look as pretty as the Tesla battery, but they also have to be basically as easy to run and as easy to work with Stu's system as making coffee. And this is where I think between between things like data analytics and clever ways of controlling systems, I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting stuff happening in that world over the next several years.
Thank you. Let's thank our speakers one more time. I want to thank you all for coming, and one last minute housekeeping. You all got a survey in your brochure, and we would love for your feedback. So please fill that out and hand that over to one of the GEMS board members walking around. We'd appreciate it, but thank you very much for participating. Thank you for coming. I know I've enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. So thank you very much, and hope you all have a good night.
Great to meet you guys.